The blue crystal towers of Zephyr Prime hummed with fear as Council Leader Veltar stood before the great viewing screen that showed their dying galaxy. The mechanical plague, known as the Void Swarm, had consumed 3 more star systems in the off. Past month and now, their dark ships moved like hungry insects toward the heart of Zephyrian space. Veltar's pale green skin seemed to glow with worry as he watched the latest reports flow across his command console. Science. Director Kinway entered. The council chamber with data tablets clutched in her 4 slender arms. Her large black eyes reflected the same terror that gripped every Zephyrian across their 12 peaceful worlds. She had spent the last 72 hours without sleep trying to find any solution to their approaching doom, but every calculation led to the same terrible conclusion. The energy shields around Zephyr 7 failed an hour ago, she reported with a voice that trembled like wind chimes in a storm. The swarm consumed the entire planet in less than 30 minutes. 8 billion souls simply gone as if they never existed at all. Veltar closed his eyes and felt the weight of leadership pressing down on his shoulders like a mountain. These Zephyrians had built their civilization on the principles of peace and Asafis. Knowledge sharing. They had never developed weapons because they had never needed them. For 3,000 years they had lived in harmony with nature and each other, creating the most beautiful art and advancing science through pure curiosity rather than military need. Now that same peaceful nature that had brought them such joy was leading them toward extinction. The Void Swarm cared nothing for their poetry, or their music, or their elegant mathematical theories. The mechanical entities simply consumed everything in their path, turning matter and energy into more copies of themselves in an endless cycle of hunger. What about the defense fleet from the Andorian Council? Veltar asked, though he already knew the answer from Kinway's expression. They retreated after losing half their ships in the first engagement, she replied sadly. Admiral Vexmore sent word that they cannot risk their remaining forces against an enemy that adapts to every weapon they use. The Andorians are evacuating their border worlds and falling back to their core systems. The viewing screen shifted to show the latest long-range sensor data from their monitoring stations. The Void Swarm stretched across space like a dark cancer, made up of millions of geometric ships that reflected no light. Each vessel seemed to pulse with hungry energy as they moved in perfect formation toward the next target. The Zephyrians had tried everything their peaceful minds could imagine, but nothing worked against an enemy that existed only to consume. The Crystalline Collective sent their regrets, Kinway continued as she reviewed more messages. They say the swarm has learned to break down their molecular structures too quickly for their regeneration abilities to keep up. The Ethereal Confederacy is in full retreat, and the Trade Union dissolved their government rather than face the approaching threat. Veltar walked to the great window that looked out over the capital city of New Harmony. Below him, millions of Zephyrians went about their daily lives trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, even as their world prepared for evacuation. Children still played in the crystal gardens while their parents worked in the knowledge archives, trying to preserve as much of their culture as possible before the end came. The evacuation ships sat ready in the orbital docks, but they could only carry a fraction of the population, and there was nowhere safe to run anyway. Every civilization in this part of the galaxy was either already consumed or fleeing toward unknown space, where they might find temporary shelter before the swarm caught up with them. There must be something, Veltar said, as much to himself as to his science director. In all our archives and all our collected knowledge, there must be some solution we have not considered. Kinway set down her data tablets and moved to stand beside her leader. Together, they had governed the Zephyrian people through minor crises and natural disasters, but nothing had prepared them for this ultimate test. She thought of her own family, waiting in the lower city, and wondered if she would ever see her children grow up to become the artists and scientists she had always hoped they would be. "There is one possibility," she said quietly after a long moment of silence. "Something we discovered in the ruins on Zarian 9 last year during the archaeological expedition." Veltar turned to look at her with the first spark of hope he had felt in weeks. The expedition to Zarian 9 had uncovered the remains of an ancient civilization that had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only fragments of their advanced technology and mysterious structures that defied analysis. "The quantum beacon," Kinway continued. "Our best scientists have been studying it for months, trying to understand how it works. The device appears to be some kind of long-range communication system that can send messages across vast distances of space and time. The beacon was a crystalline artifact about the size of a person that hummed with strange energies when active. The symbols carved into its surface had taken the Zephyrian linguists months to partially decode, and even now they only understood fragments of its true purpose. What they did know was that it required enormous amounts of energy to activate and could apparently only be used once before burning out completely. The inscription we translated suggests it was designed to call for help," Kinway explained. She pulled up holographic displays showing their research. "The ancient people who built it seem to have faced some kind of extinction event themselves. Perhaps they created this device as a last, desperate attempt to contact other advanced civilizations who might come to their aid." Veltar studied the translation carefully, reading the flowing script that the archaeologists had painstakingly reconstructed. The message was clearly a plea for assistance, though many of the specific details remained unclear due to the vast differences between ancient and modern languages. "If we activate the beacon, it will drain our remaining energy reserves," Kinway warned. "The power requirements are massive, and we would have to shut down our planetary shields in most of our city systems to generate enough energy. If no help comes, we would be completely defenseless when the swarm arrives." The council leader walked back to his command console and brought up the tactical display showing the void swarm's projected arrival time. They had perhaps 6 days before. The mechanical plague reached Zephyr Prime and began the final phase of Zephyrian extinction. 6 days to make a choice that would either save their people or guarantee their destruction. "But if we do nothing, we die anyway," Veltar said quietly. "At least this way we have a chance that someone out there might hear our call and come to help us." He thought about the billions of Zephyrians who trusted him to find a solution, and the thousands of years of art and knowledge that would be lost forever if they failed. The beacon represented their only hope, even if that hope was built on ancient technology they barely understood, and the desperate wish that somewhere in the vast galaxy there existed other beings who might care about their fate. "Prepare the beacon for activation," Veltar ordered as he made the hardest decision of his life. "Send word to all our worlds that we are attempting one final solution. Tell our people to prepare for whatever comes next, but do not give up hope." Kinway bowed formally and began sending the necessary orders to the technical teams who would handle the beacon activation. Around them, the crystal towers continued to hum with nervous energy as the Zephyrian civilization prepared to cast their message into the void and pray that someone kind would hear their desperate call for help. Admiral Jack Morrison was reviewing fleet deployment reports in his office aboard Luna Station when the communication array started screaming alerts across every monitor in the Terran Defense Command. The signals officer, Lieutenant Katie Burns, rushed into his office with a data pad that showed readings unlike anything they had ever recorded before. "Sir, we have detected an extremely powerful transmission of unknown origin," she reported with excitement and concern mixing in her voice. "The signal appears to be some kind of focused quantum communication that punched straight through our deep space monitoring grid." Morrison set down his coffee and studied the readings that showed energy signatures far beyond anything human technology could produce. The transmission had lasted only 17 minutes, But during that time, it had generated more raw communication power than Earth's entire satellite network used in a full year. Where did it come from? He asked as he activated his personal command terminal to review the full data. That's the strange part, sir, Burns replied as she highlighted sections of the sensor data. The signal originated from a point approximately 47 light years away in the direction of the Andromeda spiral, but the transmission method suggests technology at least a century ahead of our current capabilities. The Admiral walked to the observation window that looked out over the massive shipyards surrounding Luna, where humanity's greatest military achievement took shape in the darkness of space. 300 warships of various classes floated in perfect formation, representing 20 years of focused military development and the combined industrial might of every nation on Earth. Colonel Lisa Hayes entered the command center with her intelligence team carrying translation equipment and analysis computers. As the head of xenological studies, she had spent her entire career preparing for the day when humanity would make contact with alien intelligence, but she had always assumed it would happen during exploration missions rather than through mysterious signals appearing in their own backyard. "We have managed a partial translation of the transmission," she announced as her team set up their equipment around the main conference table. "The signal contains what appears to be a distress call and a request for military assistance." Morrison felt his pulse quicken as he realized they were experiencing humanity's first confirmed contact with alien intelligence, and that contact was a call for help. He activated the secure communication system that would bring together the top military commanders from every human nation as they faced this historic moment. Captain Ben Rodriguez from the Intelligence Division pulled up holographic displays showing the translation progress. The alien language used complex mathematical structures and conceptual frameworks that challenged their best linguistic computers, but the core message was becoming clear through careful analysis. The beings identify themselves as the Zephyrian civilization, Rodriguez explained as symbols and text scrolled across the displays. They report facing extinction from something they call the Void Swarm, which appears to be some kind of mechanical plague that consumes entire star systems. Conference room filled with officers and scientists as word of the alien contact spread through the command structure. Fleet Commander Susan Parker took her seat at the tactical planning station while Marine General Pete Harrison reviewed the military implications of contact with a species under attack by unknown hostile forces. The translation algorithms are having difficulty with some of the cultural references. Colonel Hayes continued as she worked with her team to refine their understanding. But the basic request seems to be for immediate military intervention against a threat that has already destroyed multiple civilizations in their region of space. Morrison studied the star charts showing the general direction of the signal and calculated the deployment time for various fleet configurations. The distance was significant, but well within the range of their newest hyperspace drives, and the strategic implications of first contact with aliens under military threat were enormous. "What kind of force projection are we looking at?" he asked his tactical staff as they began preliminary mission planning. Commander Dale Collins brought up fleet readiness reports, showing that virtually every major warship was either fully operational or could be made ready for deployment within 72 hours. The Terran Defense Fleet had been built with the assumption that space would be hostile and that humanity would need overwhelming firepower to survive among potentially dangerous alien civilizations. "We can deploy the entire expeditionary fleet," Collins reported with confidence. 300 ships, including 12 Dreadnought-class vessels, 6 carrier groups, and full marine assault capabilities. Total personnel would be approximately 50,000 military personnel with complete logistical support. Dr. Rachel Stone from the Xenobiology Department raised concerns about cultural misunderstandings and the need for careful diplomatic protocols. But her warnings were lost in the excitement of military planning. The officers around the table saw this as validation of decades of preparation and an opportunity to demonstrate human military capabilities to the wider galaxy. The aliens specifically mention offering all their knowledge and resources in exchange. For assistance, Captain Rodriguez added as he reviewed more translation data. This appears to be a formal alliance proposal with significant strategic benefits for Earth. Morrison made the decision that would change human history as he authorized the largest military deployment in the species' existence. Operation Thunderstrike would send the entire Terran war machine across space to assist an alien civilization and establish humanity's presence in galactic affairs through military action. Captain Greg Thompson received orders to prepare his dreadnought, TCS Retribution, as the flagship for the operation, while Captain Amy Davis readied her carrier group aboard the TCS Valkyrie for extended combat operations. Throughout the solar system, military bases activated their highest alert levels as personnel prepared for humanity's first interstellar war. The translation teams continued working to decode additional details from the alien message, but the military commanders were already deep into operational planning. They interpreted references to cultural sharing as intelligence briefings and mentions of peaceful cooperation as alliance, terminology from a species that clearly understood the realities of warfare. Major Tony Garcia began selecting marine assault teams for potential boarding actions, while Lieutenant Jake Williams and his fighter squadron ran combat simulations based on the limited data of their unknown enemy. The entire human military machine shifted into high gear as they prepared to face threats unlike anything they had encountered before. The aliens report that conventional weapons have proven ineffective against this void swarm, Colonel Hayes noted as she reviewed the tactical information embedded in the message. They appear to have exhausted their military options and are requesting advanced weapon systems and strategic support. Morrison nodded grimly as he realized they were facing an enemy that had already defeated multiple alien civilizations. The challenge would be significant, but humanity had spent generations developing weapons and tactics specifically designed to handle threats that conventional forces could not manage. Medical Officer Dr. Jennifer Mills prepared medical facilities for potential alien casualties, while Chief Engineer Colonel Frank Wright reviewed the technical specifications for extended operations at interstellar distances. Every department of the Terran Defense Force worked together to make Operation Thunderstrike the most comprehensive military response in human history. Signal all commands to begin immediate deployment preparations, Morrison ordered as he watched the alien transmission data scroll across his monitors. We launch in 60 hours with full battle readiness. Humanity is going to war. The Admiral had no way of knowing that the desperate aliens who had sent their plea for help had never fired. A weapon in anger, and considered war to be an incomprehensible concept. He could not imagine that their reference to offering knowledge meant art and philosophy rather than military intelligence, or that their request for assistance was a cry for evacuation rather than a call for military alliance. As the human war fleet prepared to jump across space towards Zephyrian territory, both species made ready for what they thought would be their salvation, not knowing that they were about to participate in the most spectacular misunderstanding in galactic history. The quantum beacon on Zephyr Prime had been silent for 3 days since transmitting their desperate message into the void, and Veltar was beginning to wonder if their gamble had failed completely. The void swarm continued its relentless advance, consuming 2 more outer colonies, while the Zephyrian people prepared for what seemed like inevitable extinction. Then their deep space sensors detected something impossible moving through hyperspace toward their system. The energy signatures showed a massive fleet of unknown vessels approaching at speeds that defied their understanding of physics and engineering. Kinway rushed to the council chamber with sensor readings that made no sense according to everything they knew about space travel. Council leader, the response to our beacon is beyond anything we could have imagined, she announced with wonder, and relief flooding her voice. 300 vessels are approaching our system, and their technology appears to be centuries ahead of our own capabilities. Veltar studied the sensor data with growing amazement as he realized the scope of what was coming to help them. The approaching fleet represented more ships than the Zephyrians had ever built in their entire history, and each vessel showed energy readings that suggested incredible technological advancement. They must be representatives from multiple advanced civilizations, he said, as he watched the formation patterns that showed careful organization and purpose. Perhaps our message reached some kind of galactic alliance that specializes in helping threatened species. The Zephyrian people across all the remaining worlds received the news with celebration and hope as they realized their call for help had been answered by beings with the power to possibly stand against the Void Swarm. Children who had been practicing evacuation drills began planning welcome ceremonies instead, while their parents prepared cultural presentations to show their gratitude to the incoming rescuers. Artists worked frantically to complete memorial sculptures and poetry collections that would preserve the best of Zephyrian culture for their saviors to witness before the end came. Musicians composed symphonies that captured the essence of their peaceful civilization, while historians compiled archives of their greatest achievements and discoveries. Meanwhile, 47 light-years away, the human war fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the target system and immediately went to full combat alert as their sensors detected the massive signature of the Void Swarm. Battle Group Commander Colonel Pete Harrison studied the tactical displays with growing concern as the scope of the enemy became clear. "Admiral, this is unlike anything in our threat assessment databases," he reported to Morrison aboard the flagship. "The hostile force appears to span multiple star systems with individual unit counts in the millions. Whatever these aliens are, fighting it represents an extinction-level threat to any civilization." Morrison reviewed the sensor data that showed geometric patterns of ships moving with perfect coordination as they systematically consumed everything in their path. The Void Swarm was clearly mechanical in nature, but displayed organizational capabilities that suggested some form of central intelligence directing the assault. Captain Amy Davis prepared her fighter squadrons for deployment while her pilots studied the enemy formations, trying to identify weaknesses and tactical opportunities. Lieutenant Jake Williams ran combat simulations with his squadron mates as they prepared for the largest space battle any human had ever imagined. The aliens were not exaggerating when they said conventional weapons had failed, observed Dr. Rachel Stone as she analyzed the swarm's apparent immunity to energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. Whatever this enemy is, it has adapted to counter every form of attack the defending civilizations could manage. The human fleet moved deeper into the system, using stealth protocols to avoid detection while they gathered intelligence on both the enemy and their supposed allies. Captain Greg Thompson positioned his dreadnought for maximum tactical advantage while Marine units under Major Tony Garcia prepared for potential boarding operations. Back on Zephyr Prime, the approaching human fleet appeared on long-range sensors as a beautiful formation of advanced vessels that moved with precision and purpose toward their world. The Zephyrians interpreted the military formation as a defensive escort pattern designed to protect the larger ships that they assumed were filled with refugees from other threatened civilizations. They are maintaining communication silence, probably to avoid detection by the Void Swarm, Kinway observed as she monitored the fleet's approach. These beings clearly understand the tactical situation and are taking appropriate precautions to ensure they can reach us safely. Veltar ordered the preparation of formal greeting ceremonies that would welcome their rescuers with the highest honors Zephyrian culture could provide. The capital city of New Harmony transformed itself into a celebration of art and knowledge as the population worked together to show their gratitude to the beings who had answered their call. The approaching humans detected the Zephyrian preparations through their reconnaissance sensors, but interpreted the gatherings as military briefings and tactical planning sessions. The energy readings from the alien cities suggested significant industrial activity that could indicate weapons manufacturing or defensive preparations. Colonel Lisa Hayes worked with her translation teams to decode additional Zephyrian transmissions. But the cultural differences made accurate interpretation nearly impossible. References to artistic expression were translated as strategic communications, while mentions of cultural preservation became discussions of military intelligence sharing. The aliens appear to be mobilizing their entire population for the coming engagement, she reported to Admiral Morrison as they reviewed the communications intercepts. They are clearly preparing to coordinate with our forces in a joint military operation against the Void Swarm. The human commanders had no way of understanding that the Zephyrians had never developed military technology or tactics because their civilization had evolved along purely peaceful lines. Every reference to cooperation was interpreted through human military doctrine, while the alien focus on cultural activities was seen as some form of psychological warfare preparation. Captain Ben Rodriguez analyzed Zephyrian communications for intelligence about enemy capabilities and defensive strategies, but found only references to beauty and harmony that his military training could not properly contextualize. The aliens seemed to have detailed knowledge about the Void Swarm's consumption patterns, but no apparent tactical doctrine for engaging them in combat. Either these aliens have developed some form of warfare completely outside our understanding, he concluded, or they are deliberately concealing their military capabilities for security reasons until we establish proper alliance protocols. Fighter Pilot Lieutenant Megan Clark ran final equipment checks on her interceptor while studying what little data they had about alien technology. The Zephyrian ships showed no obvious weapon systems, but their power generation capabilities suggested they might be using some form of advanced energy projection that human sensors could not properly detect. Major Garcia briefed his marine assault teams on the possibility of boarding alien vessels for joint operations while warning them about unknown technologies and cultural differences that could complicate mission objectives. The Marines prepared for anything from advanced artificial intelligence to exotic weapon systems that defied conventional military understanding. As the human fleet approached the inner system, both species continued their preparations based on completely different assumptions about what was about to happen. The Zephyrians planned welcome ceremonies and cultural exchanges, while the humans prepared for the largest military engagement in their history. Neither side realized that they were about to participate in first contact between a species that had never known war and another that had elevated warfare to an art form. The stage was set for a misunderstanding that would reshape both civilizations and determine the fate of an entire region of space. The countdown to contact continued as two vastly different peoples prepared to meet each other while facing an enemy that threatened to consume everything they had ever built or dreamed of becoming. The human war fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian space with all weapon systems charged and ready for immediate combat deployment. 300 warships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation as Admiral Morrison gave the order for full tactical alert. Every gun turret swiveled to optimal firing positions, while fighter squadrons prepared for launch from carrier decks across the fleet. To the humans, this was standard military protocol when entering potentially hostile territory, but to the Zephyrians monitoring the arrival, it appeared that their saviors had brought the most incredible display of protective power anyone had ever imagined. The sheer scale of the fleet took their breath away as they realized that somewhere in the galaxy existed beings with technology so advanced they could deploy hundreds of massive ships to help complete strangers. Council leader Valtar stood in the communications center surrounded by his finest poets and cultural ambassadors as they prepared the most beautiful welcome message their civilization could create. The greeting would express their deepest gratitude, while sharing the essence of Zephyrian philosophy and artistic achievement with these magnificent rescuers who had traveled so far to help them. Blessed beings of the distant stars, we greet you. With hearts full of wonder and gratitude beyond measure, Veltar transmitted as his message reached the human fleet. Your arrival brings hope to our darkening skies, and we offer you the treasures of our culture and knowledge as thanks for answering our desperate call. We have prepared celebrations of art and music to honor your sacrifice and wisdom in coming to witness our final cultural expressions before the consuming darkness takes us all. Aboard the flagship TCS Retribution, the translation computers struggled to process the flowery alien language, while Admiral Morrison and his staff tried to extract tactical information from what appeared to be an incredibly detailed strategic briefing. The references to cultural treasures were interpreted as military intelligence, while mentions of final expressions seemed to indicate last-ditch defensive preparations. Colonel Lisa Hayes worked frantically with her linguistic team to decode what they assumed were Alliance protocols and operational parameters hidden within the elaborate alien communication style. The Zephyrian focus on gratitude and celebration was translated as formal military courtesy, while their offers of knowledge sharing became promises of technical cooperation and intelligence exchange. Admiral, the aliens are confirming alliance terms and offering full intelligence cooperation, she reported as her computers continued processing the message. They appear to be requesting our assessment of their final defensive positions and strategic capabilities against the approaching enemy force. Morrison nodded grimly as he prepared humanity's standard first contact military protocol, which included detailed fleet specifications and tactical doctrines designed to establish clear communication with potential allies. The response would demonstrate human military capabilities, while requesting detailed information about enemy forces and defensive strategies. Unknown alien vessel, this is Admiral Jack Morrison, commanding the Terran Expeditionary Fleet responding to your request for military assistance. He transmitted back toward the Zephyrian homeworld. We deploy 300 combat vessels, including 12 Dreadnought-class ships, 6 carrier battle groups, and full marine assault capabilities, totaling 50,000 military personnel equipped with plasma cannons, kinetic projectiles fusion, warheads, and advanced targeting systems designed for deep space combat operations. The Admiral continued with detailed specifications about human weapon systems and tactical doctrines, while requesting immediate intelligence about Void Swarm capabilities and current defensive positions around Zephyrian territory. To the human military mind, this was essential information sharing between allied forces, preparing for joint combat operations. On Zephyr Prime, the translation of Morrison's response created confusion and wonder among the Zephyrian leadership as they tried to understand what appeared to be an incredibly detailed explanation of how their rescuers planned to help preserve Zephyrian culture and knowledge. The references to combat capabilities were interpreted as advanced technological systems for protecting artistic treasures, while mentions of military personnel became specialized cultural preservation experts. These beings possess technology beyond our wildest dreams, Kinway said with amazement as she studied the translated message. They speak of plasma systems and fusion devices that must be some form of advanced energy manipulation for protecting knowledge archives and cultural artifacts from the consumption effects of the Void Swarm. Veltar was overwhelmed by the apparent generosity and sophistication of their rescuers, who seemed to have brought an entire civilization's worth of resources specifically to help preserve Zephyrian culture. The detailed technical specifications suggested beings who understood the importance of art and knowledge in ways that transcended even Zephyrian philosophy. Meanwhile, human reconnaissance ships moving through the outer system detected the full scope of the Void Swarm and reported back to the fleet with tactical assessments that confirmed their worst fears. The mechanical plague stretched across multiple star systems with individual ships, numbering in the millions, all moving in perfect coordination toward the remaining Zephyrian worlds. Captain Greg Thompson studied the enemy formation patterns from high. His position aboard the dreadnought, while his weapons officers calculated firing solutions for the coming engagement. The Void Swarm showed no obvious command structure, but displayed tactical behavior that suggested some form of central intelligence directing their movements. Admiral, we have visual confirmation of enemy forces, and the situation is worse than initial projections indicated, Thompson reported as his sensor data reached the flagship. The hostiles appear to be some form of self-replicating mechanical entities with adaptation capabilities that explain their success against conventional military forces. Lieutenant Jake Williams prepared his fighter squadron for launch while studying the swarm's movement patterns, looking for weaknesses and tactical opportunities. The enemy ships showed geometric designs that prioritized function over form, with no obvious aesthetic considerations that might indicate biological origins or cultural development. Back on Zephyr Prime, the cultural preparation committees worked frantically to complete their welcome presentations while monitoring the communications between their rescuers and the approaching threat. The military terminology being used was completely foreign to their peaceful society, but they interpreted it as some form of advanced technical language for discussing cultural preservation methods. Captain Amy Davis launched preliminary reconnaissance flights to gather additional intelligence about both the enemy and the alien civilization they had come to help, but her pilots reported data that made no sense according to standard military analysis. The Zephyrian ships showed no weapon systems or defensive capabilities, while their cities appeared to be focused entirely on artistic and educational facilities. Admiral, there's something wrong with our intelligence about these aliens, reported Dr. Rachel Stone as she analyzed the cultural data her teams were collecting. Their entire civilization appears to be built around peaceful pursuits with no military infrastructure or defensive capabilities whatsoever. The observation created confusion among the human command staff, who had assumed they were dealing with a sophisticated military alliance that had simply exhausted its conventional options against an overwhelming enemy force. The possibility that they had contacted a completely peaceful species who had never developed warfare was so foreign to human thinking that it seemed impossible. Colonel Pete Harrison reviewed defensive positions around Zephyrian worlds and found elaborate cultural centers and knowledge archives, but no fortifications or weapon installations. The aliens appeared to have invested their entire technological development into artistic expression and scientific research with no consideration for military applications. Sir, I think we may have misunderstood the nature of our allies, Colonel Hayes said quietly as more translation data came in from Zephyrian transmissions. These beings appear to be requesting evacuation assistance rather than military cooperation, and their references to final cultural expressions suggest they expect to die rather than fight. The revelation hit Admiral Morrison like a physical blow, as he realized that humanity's first contact with alien intelligence was not with fellow warriors, but with a completely peaceful civilization that had never known conflict. The Zephyrians had not called for military assistance, but for rescue from a threat they could not possibly resist with their pacifist philosophy and complete lack of weapons. But by then it was too late to change course as forward human scout ships detected void swarm units moving toward their position, and the first shots of humanity's introduction to galactic warfare lit up the darkness of space with deadly fire. The first engagement between human forces and the Void Swarm lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, but in that brief time, the mechanical entities learned something that would reshape their understanding of galactic civilization. These newcomers were not like any species they had previously encountered and consumed. Lieutenant Shake Williams, led the initial fighter sweep that made contact with Void Swarm scout units near the outer edge of Zephyrian space. His squadron of 12 interceptors engaged a formation of 30 geometric enemy ships that had easily destroyed similar numbers of alien defenders from other civilizations. The swarm units moved to surround and consume the human fighters, using tactics that had proven successful hundreds of times before. Instead of fleeing or being overwhelmed, the human pilots tore through the enemy formation like wolves among sheep. Williams destroyed 3 swarm ships in the first 30 seconds, using plasma cannon bursts that completely vaporized their crystalline hulls, while his wingman, Captain Megan Clark, eliminated 2 more with kinetic projectiles that punched straight through their adaptive shielding. Control, this is Reaper Squadron reporting first contact with hostile forces. Williams transmitted back to the carrier as his fighters regrouped for another attack run. Enemy units are displaying adaptive defense capabilities, but appear vulnerable to concentrated plasma fire and high-velocity kinetic strikes. The Void Swarm units that survived the initial engagement immediately began transmitting tactical data back to their collective consciousness as they tried to analyze these new opponents. The humans fought with a precision and aggression that defied every previous encounter the swarm had experienced with organic life forms. Captain Amy Davis monitored the fighter engagement from her carrier while preparing to launch additional squadrons as the scope of the enemy force became clear. Her sensors showed Void Swarm units moving throughout the system in numbers that exceeded their initial estimates by orders of magnitude, but the early combat results suggested human weapons were effective against targets that had resisted every other form of attack. Admiral, we have confirmed enemy contact and our weapon systems appear to be achieving better than expected results, she reported to Morrison as more fighter squadrons launched from carriers across the fleet, requesting permission to begin full-scale combat operations. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical displays showing human fighters engaging increasing numbers of enemy units, while Zephyrian observers transmitted messages of amazement and terror as they witnessed their peaceful rescuers unleashing devastating firepower against the approaching threat. The cultural misunderstanding was complete, but the military situation was becoming clear. Captain Greg Thompson brought his dreadnought TCS Retribution into weapons range of the main Void Swarm formation and opened fire with the most powerful guns humanity had ever built. The massive plasma cannons designed to crack moon-sized asteroids sent coherent energy beams across thousands of kilometers to impact Swarm command vessels with results that shocked both sides of the engagement. Void Swarm ships that had withstood concentrated fire from entire alien fleets simply vaporized under the assault from human heavy weapons. The Dreadnought's main battery cycled through targeting solutions faster than the enemy could adapt their defensive systems, while secondary guns eliminated smaller units that tried to close for boarding operations. Target destroyed continuing to next priority, Thompson reported calmly as another Swarm command ship disappeared in a flash of superheated plasma. Enemy forces are attempting to adapt, but their reaction time appears insufficient to counter our targeting cycles. The mechanical entities had evolved their tactics through millions of encounters with organic civilizations, but they had never faced opponents who treated warfare as both science and art. Human military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower combined with tactical flexibility that kept enemy forces constantly reacting rather than implementing their own strategies. Major Tony Garcia launched Marine assault teams in armored shuttles toward damaged Void Swarm vessels that survived the initial bombardment. The boarding operations represented something completely outside the enemy's experience, as human soldiers fought their way through mechanical corridors using weapons designed specifically for ship-to-ship combat in hostile environments, breaching Hull Section 7 and proceeding to what appears to be a central processing core. Garcia transmitted as his teams advanced through the geometric interior of a swarm ship. Enemy resistance is minimal and appears to consist of automated defense systems rather than actual crew members. The Marines discovered that Void Swarm vessels were essentially massive machines with no individual consciousness or tactical thinking beyond their programmed responses. The mechanical entities relied on overwhelming numbers and adaptive technology rather than creativity or strategic planning, which made them vulnerable to opponents who could think faster than they could adapt. Back on Zephyr, Prime the Zephyrian, people watched in stunned amazement as their supposed cultural preservationists systematically annihilated an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The humans fought with a precision and ferocity that challenged every assumption about peaceful civilization and advanced technology. Council leader, these beings are not what we thought they were, Kinway said with wonder and growing fear as she watched human warships tear through Void Swarm formations. They are warriors beyond anything we could have imagined, and they fight with weapons that make our most advanced technology look primitive. Veltar struggled to understand what he was witnessing as the humans demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded his wildest nightmares. These were not fellow peaceful beings who had come to help preserve Zephyrian culture, but rather the galaxy's most dangerous predators, who had accidentally been summoned to defend a species they barely understood. The battle expanded across multiple star systems as Admiral Morrison deployed his full fleet against Void Swarm concentrations that had been building for months in preparation for the final assault on Zephyrian worlds. Human tactics emphasized mobility and concentrated firepower that prevented the enemy from using their numerical advantage effectively. Dr. Rachel Stone monitored communications from both sides as she finally began to understand the true scope of the cultural misunderstanding that had brought them here. The Zephyrians were terrified pacifists who had never developed weapons, while humanity represented everything they found incomprehensible about the universe. Admiral, I believe we need to consider the psychological impact our combat operations are having on the people we came to help, she reported as Zephyrian transmissions showed increasing panic about their rescuers' true nature. These beings have never witnessed warfare, and our military capabilities are traumatizing them almost as much as the enemy threat. Morrison made the decision that would define humanity's role in galactic civilization as he chose to continue the military operation despite the cultural complications. The Void Swarm represented an extinction threat that required immediate action regardless of philosophical differences between species. The final engagement occurred at the swarm's primary nexus where millions of mechanical units had gathered to coordinate the consumption of remaining Zephyrian worlds. Human forces attacked the central processing facility with fusion warheads that released energy equivalent to stellar events, while Marine teams planted antimatter charges in critical system nodes. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away as the Void Swarm's collective consciousness simply ceased to exist, taking with it the coordination that had made them so dangerous. Individual units continued operating for several hours, but without central direction, they became nothing more than scrap metal drifting through space. In the aftermath of victory, both species began the difficult process of understanding each other. Across the vast cultural divide that separated warrior philosophers from peaceful dreamers, the Zephyrians slowly realized that they had not summoned fellow pacifists, but rather the galaxy's most effective military force, while humanity discovered that not all alien contact would involve conflict. Admiral Morrison established the first human-alien alliance not through conquest, but through protection as the Terran Defense Fleet began patrolling Zephyrian space against future threats. The misunderstood distress call became the foundation for a partnership between beings who could create beautiful art and others who could destroy any enemy that threatened such beauty. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders worth protecting, and humanity had found its purpose among the stars, not as conquerors, but as guardians of civilizations too peaceful to protect themselves from the darkness that dwelt between worlds.